So anyways, thank you very much for coming this afternoon. My name is Scott Ambler. I've been helping organizations around the world, myself and my company have been helping organizations around the world to understand and implement Agile and Lean in enterprise class settings, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 very often, government agencies, all that good sort of stuff. So we tend to take on some of the harder problems, I guess you would say. So anyways, I'm going to share some of our experiences over the next hour. I'm also going to share some data from industry. One of the things that I do on a regular basis is run surveys, industry surveys. And because I'm a firm believer in having fact-based discussions, and I've been open sourcing all my work for years now, so it's open source research. I was one of the pioneers of this a little over 10 years ago now. And because I'm a firm believer in having, I don't believe research unless I have access to the source data because I want to analyze it myself. And I think that's a fairly reasonable thing to ask for these days. So I've been doing that for a long time, and I'm lucky enough to have master's level students now doing their thesis, and sometimes PhD students using my data and all that good sort of stuff for their work. So I'm very happy with that. And I often go into customers and I'll see my data being presented back to me. So that's sort of an interesting thing as well. So anyways, I'm going to cover a lot of ground today. Hopefully get some of you thinking outside of the box. Particularly if you're new to Agile, I'll get you thinking outside of the box. Or even if you've been doing this Agile stuff for a while now, I'm going to hopefully make some observations. Some of them will, I hopefully think you'll go, you'll say, man, he's right. I've seen that too. I just haven't thought about that. So I'm also a firm believer in questioning some of the rhetoric that we hear. And like I said, I'm going to share some data from some of my research, and I'm going to call complete and utter BS on some of the things that the Agile community tell you. Some of the canon, Agile canon, I'm going to question severely because I think it's observably not true. But anyways, I'll keep in suspense on that one. So what do we want to talk about? So first of all, I'm going to define, what am I talking about when I say easy Agile? Because I'm a firm believer that we've gone beyond easy Agile now. So what am I talking about? I think that's a fair question to ask. And then I'm going to get into a lot of discussion around what does Agile look like in these large enterprises? What's the situation that we actually face? How do we overcome that situation? What are the types of skills that we need to have as practitioners, as coaches? If we're hiring people, what should we be looking for? I want to try to hopefully give you some insight into some of those questions. And then I'll wrap up with some thoughts around how you go about a successful transition, and frankly, I think those are phenomenally basic thoughts, but I'm often shocked at how many organizations we go into which are on their third and sometimes fourth round of an Agile transition, and they shoot themselves in the foot over and over and over again because apparently the laws of physics don't apply to them because they're special. Well, I hope I'm not bursting anybody's bubble, but none of you are special, regardless of what your parents told you when you were young. We're all facing the same basic problems. So I think we should start sharing some of these experiences. So anyways, what am I talking about when it comes to easy Agile? So I'm going to go at it from a couple different perspectives. First of all, there's the mindset perspective. And when we're doing this transition to Agile, we get this range of people. Some people, are just love Agile. We're preaching to the choir with some people, and others are very, very skeptical. I've had several conversations today with people that came to the booth around how they're dealing with these skeptics in their organization. And any given person in your company will be somewhere on that sort of a spectrum. And then we also have this issue of, do people like change? Do they want to be, do they embrace change? Some people do. Some people love change. We thrive in this. A lot of people who are pro-Agile certainly thrive in change, and other people avoid change. And sometimes it's their job to avoid change. And they're very conservative. They're very leery about this loosey-goosey Agile stuff. And we'll see this across the board in organizations. Once again, this is a spectrum. And any given decent-sized organization will have people in all parts of the spectrum. So easy Agile, the stuff that a lot of us write about, is up here in this quadrant for the most part. It's the people that want accept change. They're very open-minded. They love this Agile concept. The early adopters, the experimenters, all those good sorts of folks. Hard Agile are we have people who prefer to avoid change. They don't want to be changed. They don't want to change themselves. They don't want to improve and grow. They're happy with what they're doing. Very skeptical as Agile. And then of course we have this intermediate area too. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So anyways, we start to see that. Then we also have the context problem. Doc was talking about this earlier today. Context counts. That's actually the tagline of my company. Different teams, different people, different teams, different situations will work differently. Any given team is facing a unique situation. So one size does not fit all. One leadership style does not fit all. I think that was a fairly clear message this morning. One process does not fit all. One process framework does not fit all. We really need to be smart about this. We need to do what's right in the given situation that we face. And the situation changes over time. So it's not as if we're in a static environment as well. So some of the harder things to deal with in Agile, what do you do when you're a geographically distributed team, or you're a very large team, or you're dealing with regulatory stuff? What do you do when you're dealing with a complex domain and these user stories just don't cut it? You got to get a little more complicated than that. What happens when you're dealing with a complex technical environment? You got multiple platforms and legacy systems and legacy data, and you got to fix some of this stuff. It starts to get pretty interesting after a while. What happens when you have people working for different companies? Sometimes we've even outsourced some of the work. That throws a bit of a monkey wrench into things too. And this is the reality on the ground, by the way. I'll share some data with you in a few minutes. But all these hard Agile things, most teams suffer from at least one of these, if not more. So I think it's about, I see all these heads nod. So it's about time that we start talking about this coherently in the industry. Right? So we've got to get away from this small team, co-located, and that's great, don't get me wrong. If you can be on a small team, taking on a straightforward problem, and you're co-located, and the world's your oyster, that is great, good for you. I've never actually seen that in practice, but I hear stories, and they're wonderful stories, but I don't get brought into those sorts of situations. Okay, so anyways, this hard Agile stuff is happening a fair bit. So, what are we seeing as well in organizations? So, organizations are complex. One of the things, there's this body of knowledge or body of theory called complexity theory. And the short story is that organizations are what's called complex adaptive systems. And the short story on that is organizations are made up of a bunch of moving parts. These other teams, these divisions and teams and geographical organizations, whatever you want to call them. But the big organization is built up of smaller organizations, which are built up of smaller organizations, and so on. And all these teams affect each other. So, for example, if my team is interacting with 7 other teams in the company for whatever reason, and we make a change, we decide, we do an improvement. We hold a retrospective, we identify a process improvement, we change our behavior for whatever good reason. Well, that will have an effect, potentially, on some of these other teams that we interact with. And similarly, when those other teams have learnings, and they change their behaviors, or maybe they're not learning and they're changing their behavior anyways, random stuff happens sometimes, then that has an effect on my team. So we're constantly, hopefully positively, we're always we're changing, we're learning, we're getting better. So not only are we a collection of moving parts, but we're moving parts that are evolving and changing over time. And this is what is called a complex adaptive system. The system is complex and it's adapting as it's going. So this can be a bit of a challenge. We don't have basically we're trying to hit a moving target. Good luck with that. IT departments, my observations, IT departments are multimodal. For a few years now, Gartner's been talking about bimodal organizations. You've got some teams that go slow for whatever reason. You've got some teams going very fast for whatever reasons. And there's a great religious debate over, well, all teams should be going fast and blah, 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 whatever. But I think it's pretty easy to observe. Okay, fine, have your religious debates. But I think it's better to observe that there are several modes of operation. We talk about them all the time in the Agile community. So for example, just from a development point of view, we're often talking about Agile, the Scrum-based Agile approach, where we have these sprints or iterations. Well, that's one mode. We sometimes talk about Lean, or Kanban, all that good sort of stuff. There's another mode. Some of us a little more advanced, we're doing continuous delivery, or modern Agile now. Got to give it a new name every so often. We're Agile, so we give things new names every so often. Some of us are doing more exploratory or lean startup type stuff because we're in situations where that makes sense. So there's several ones. And down the hall, we still have a traditional team doing their thing, poor bastards that they are. Okay, it's too bad, so sad for them, but maybe we'll help them at some point. So it's pretty easy to observe that this sort of stuff is happening. And that's okay. That hopefully makes sense for each of those teams. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt on that. But if you're the type of person, say you're an enterprise architect, or you're a governance person, or you're an operations person, and you have to support and interact with these different teams working in different modes for whatever reasons, that's pretty hard on you, right? So I'm going to work with, if I'm an enterprise architect, I'll work with an Agile team in a different manner than I would work with a traditional team, and certainly in a different manner than with a continuous delivery team, and rightfully so. And as an enterprise architect, if I try to have the one enterprise architecture process to rule them all, because I'm the center of the universe and I'm going to inflict my process on everybody else, chances are exceptionally good it's only going to work for a few of those modes, maybe, but not for all of them, because these delivery teams are working in very different ways. So the implication is that as an enterprise architect, if I want to be effective, I need to step up and work in a flexible manner, and I need to be able to switch modes as appropriate to work with these teams well. And that'll be the same thing for your release management people, your operations people, your infrastructure people, your portfolio management people, your governance people, and so on. So fair enough. We all touch multiple teams, therefore we need to be prepared to be flexible. What's also interesting, because we wouldn't want it to be easy, this is Agile transformation, So the problem is once again we're hitting a moving target. So we might start at the very beginning where we have a few Agile teams, maybe they've been doing stealth Agile for a while, experimenting, doing whatever they've been doing, and a lot of traditional waterfallish stuff. I know for a fact there's several people from organizations here today that are in that situation because I've already had these conversations with them without any prompting whatsoever from me. They told me their tale of woe on that one. Then, after a couple of years, if this Agile transformation is successful, well, some of your teams, you'll have a lot of teams doing some sort of Agile Scrum thing. You'll have some teams doing continuous delivery, some teams doing Lean, and so on. And you'll still probably have some traditional teams. A few more years later, it's mostly Agile and Lean with still a little bit of traditional stuff. You may or may not ever be able to squeeze the traditional stuff out for whatever reasons. Hopefully you can, but if you can't, then don't be surprised. But the point is that, once again, if I'm an enterprise architect, depending on where we are in the Agile transformation, my enterprise architecture team will have to be staffed with, at the beginning, I'll have mostly traditional enterprise architects on my team because that's what we need. A couple years in, it's a 50-50 split. Couple more years in, it's mostly Agile and Lean enterprise architects with very few people leaning towards the traditional stuff. So this is the implication for those enterprise class IT teams. Just to make things worse, our organizations face a lot of external challenges. Most organizations now are going through what's called digital transformations. We're trying to automate as much as we possibly can, offer services, value streams, these services end to end, and supporting them much better in a digital manner. And we have very interesting interactions now with our customers. This is a huge threat. Every single company I'm working with right now has at least some sort of digital transformation plan in place, or they're very scared about the digital transformations of their competitors or up-and-coming competitors. The pace of change, all that good sort of stuff. Our value streams, or the way we make money, is changing on a regular basis. We need to change with it. We have these disruptive competitors. We do a lot of work in the financial industry. What's interesting is more and more of the large financial institutions that we're worried about are not that concerned about the other banks that they're competing with. What they're really worried about is Apple and Google and eBay. Those are the real competitors to the large banks now. Those are the companies that are going to come in and eat the bank's lunch. And the smart banks know it. The not so smart banks, well, we'll see. But anyways, and this is happening. We see dramatic political changes. Now, unless you've been hiding under a rock for the last couple of weeks or a few months, we'll throw Brexit in there too. We're seeing some very interesting changes in the political landscape. I would hope many of your organizations are thinking in interesting ways about the implications of some of the elections lately. And I just was reading this the other day in HBR. Our customers expect to be delighted. Not just happy, not just satisfied with the stuff that we're delivering, but they want to be delighted. The expectations are rising dramatically. And we have internal challenges as well. The digital transformation stuff's affecting us on the inside too. We have alignment problems within the organization. We're worried about staff retention, an aging workforce. What do you do with all these COBOL programmers that are about to retire? And there's way more COBOL out there than we're not going to get rid of it all. That's just a fantasy. So what do you do? And it's interesting now, a lot of the colleges are now training people in COBOL. This is apparently one of the big languages in China right now. The kids coming fresh out of school have solid COBOL skills now, because all the banks, insurance companies of North America and Europe, they're all handing them off to China and to India, because they don't have the workforce here to handle it. So anyway, it's sort of interesting. We have cultural issues. We have different forms of governance. I go into a lot of organizations, and they still have a waterfall-based IT governance process. We're going to have quality gates or toll gates, and you're going to fill out the right documentation, and these people over here are going to review the documentation, and we're all going to pretend that you didn't fake the documentation. These sorts of governance processes, which are a little more than bureaucracy, have almost nothing to do with governance. But this is the way we're still governing, in theory. Very serious problem. One of my favorite questions whenever I work with governance people is, really, how well is that actually working? And then that's when the horror stories start to come out, because even the governance people know it's not working so well. And we have overly specialized staff. If I had to choose one of my biggest bugaboos when I'm doing team coaching, it's having to go into organizations that are new at Agile, and all their staff is highly specialized. I'm a business analyst, and the only thing I do is business analysis. I'm a tester, and the only thing I do is manual testing, and that sort of stuff. Yeah, you go to war with the army that you got. It is what it is, but it would have been nice if we'd been thinking a little bit more in the past, and how do we actually organize ourselves effectively and build teams a little more effectively. But anyways, that's why we're doing transformations, I guess. And then the workspace issue. I'm often amazed how difficult it can be to install a $50 whiteboard, or go out and buy an entire $30 can of whiteboard wall paint. Forget a $50 whiteboard. That's too technically difficult to install on the wall. But you can't even get somebody to spring for a can of paint. Or if you do, it takes 5 vice presidents to sign off on that incredibly difficult decision. So anyways, stuff happens. I'm sure I'm seeing, heads nod. Yeah. A can of whiteboard. Think you can get whiteboard? My God, what an awesome, what a thing to be in. Okay, so anyways, we just ran what we call the Agile State of the Union survey. This one happened to focus on scaling Agile and what we call tactical scaling. I'll talk about that in a bit. But anyway, so let's look at some of these figures here. 1/4 of Agile teams are 20 or more people. That's sort of interesting. So this, 2-pizza team, pod team, squad concept, it's nice, but clearly not everybody's doing that. 71% of Agile teams are geographically distributed in some way. Now this includes cube dwellers. So if you've got a team where everybody's still in cubes or their own little offices on the floor, you're geographically distributed. And there are ample studies out there showing that if you've got people that are like 35 feet apart, the length of a city bus, on average, people are too lazy to get off their butts and go and walk and go talk to the person that's on their team. 3 or 4 cubes away, too freaking far to walk. Okay? And we have very serious collaboration problems as a result of that. So let alone if you're spread across the planet or you got people working from home and all good sort of stuff. 62% of teams are now dealing with regulatory compliance, like PCI or FDA stuff or all those good things. And that throws a bit of a wrench into things as well. 78% of Agile teams are working on reasonably hard problems. What was interesting, a couple years ago, we compared paradigms, and organizations that were doing both traditional and Agile were more likely to hand the complicated problems to the Agile teams than they were to the traditional teams. That was sort of an interesting thing to see. So if some of you are still dealing with this, well, Agile can't take on hard problems discussion, the answer is yes, it can. 93% of Agile teams are working in technically challenging environments, so we're dealing with all the legacy stuff or multi-platform or all those good sorts of things. 96% of teams need to work with other teams. So my development team needs to work with the operations folks to get stuff released, or I need to work with the enterprise architects in order to do architecture stuff, or I need to work with the data management folks to get a column added to a table. 96% of teams aren't whole. And these are self-identified Agile teams. And having a whole team is, I would argue, some of the fundamental rhetoric in the Agile game. It's a phenomenally good idea, don't get me wrong. I'm a firm believer in whole teams. But 96% of teams apparently need to interact with somebody else to get the job done. So maybe we should talk about that a little bit more. And I really question the rhetoric. We still hear this, the Scrum Master protects you from the rest of the organization. That has got to be the worst freaking advice I've ever heard. Yeah, maybe the Scrum Master should protect us from complete dysfunction. Okay, yeah, I agree with that. But I don't want to be protected from the rest of the organization. I want to work effectively with the rest of the organization. And better yet, I want to put them to work because I'm lazy. If I can get somebody else to do the work, yeah, I'm going to do that, right? So I want to collaborate effectively with the rest of the company. Reasonably different mindset there. We have, 6 out of 10 teams have somebody on the team that is not a full-time employee. They're a contractor, they're a consultant, maybe we're working some outsourcers. 6 out of 10 teams have at least one non-FTE involved, and 1 in 6 Agile teams are doing outsourcing these days. So maybe there's a little bit of contract negotiation going on. So anyways, this is pretty hard. There's a lot of hard aspects going on here, and what that tells us is that we need to modify our approach. So when I'm in an outsourcing situation, I will work in a different manner than in a non-outsourcing situation. When I'm working on a large team, I'll work on a different manner than in a small team, and so on. Context counts. Do the right thing for the situation you find yourself in. Okay, so it's no longer this easy, agile, one-size-fits-all stuff. So, enterprise agile practice. We've got to start thinking outside of the box here. So, a few observations I want to make. Everybody is unique. Look around. I don't see 2 people that look alike. And if any of you know identical twins, one of the very first things that they will tell you is that they're very different than their twin. It's part of being an identical twin is not being identical. It's part of their makeup. So let alone people who are obviously different, and that's okay. That's okay. We can leverage that. Every team faces a unique situation. We have teams of different sizes. We have teams with different levels of geographic distribution. Oh, and by the way, at all levels of scale here, there are organizations that are successfully doing it. I've seen teams of 600-700 Agile teams of 600 or 700 people successfully delivering mission-critical software into the marketplace on a regular basis. I've also seen teams of 3 or 4 people doing the same sort of thing too, right? So, and I've also seen teams fail at all levels of size. So, but the point I want to make is don't let anybody tell you that Agile doesn't scale. When they tell you that, the only thing you should hear is they don't know how to deal with that problem. That's the only thing that I'm hearing, at least. So anyways, because we can choose to observe, and I would just invite you to get out there, Google or Bing things, and you can find case studies, blogs, all good sort of stuff of people doing this in all different types of situations. We see different levels of organization distribution. We see teams that are dealing with different levels of compliancy. We see teams dealing with different levels of domain complexity. Very straightforward web systems. I've seen teams doing the software and the dashboard of your car. Cars have phenomenal millions of lines of code in them now. It's just incredible. Very, very complex software, which we put our lives in the hands of every single day. I'm sure a lot of you remember a couple of years ago, there was some hackers running around turning off, I think it was it Grand Cherokees? They were going along the road and they were shutting them down as they went by remotely. Yeah, a little bit of software going on there. I'd hope that security patch has been released. But anyways, it's interesting. I got a friend that drives a Tesla, and he's constantly getting downloads for new software downloaded to his Tesla, and the car has different behavior over the years. He's got some interesting stories to tell about that. New features get added automatically to his car. It freaks me out when my watch gets upgraded, but let alone my car. And then we have very interesting levels of technical complexity. And we got to deal with this, right? So many of us are working in environments where we're working with legacy systems. We're working with legacy data. Not only are we integrating with these things, we also got to fix them. We got to pay down the technical debt. That throws a bit of a wrench into things too, right? Because if you don't pay down your technical debt, you're probably going to go out of business. So we got to start, if it isn't this generation fixing this problem, it will certainly be the next one. So we got to start stepping up and fixing the problems. And every organization is different. This is a bunch of company logos from various car makers. Now, cars are a commodity. Most of us own one or more cars. We can walk out onto the street right now. There's cars all over the place. It's a commodity product. But I think, you look at some of these logos here, I think it's fairly obvious that Tesla works in a slightly different manner than Ford, who works in a different manner than Chrysler, than GM, than Bugatti, and so on. Even though these companies are all producing commodity products, and I'm sure the automakers don't appreciate that, but they are making a commodity product. They all work in a very different way. I often have a chuckle when I get a customer that asks, well, we want to be a leader in this Agile stuff, but we need to see 3 case studies of organizations exactly like ours that have done this before we're willing to do it. So first of all, you're not going to find 3 case studies of identical organizations, and even if you did, you're certainly not a leader if you're waiting for 3 people to do it and then write it up. So think about that for a few minutes. Most case studies are works of fiction anyways, but although having said that, I do have 2 case studies over at my booth. And they're awesome, and they're not works of fiction. But anyways, what can you do? So context counts. So every team collaborates differently. And I'm sure you're seeing stories when you're talking with people here. There's different ways we can do things, and all these talks, let alone what you're hearing in the hallways. Every team approaches initial requirements differently because we're different people in different situations. We approach testing differently. We need different kinds of help from teams. Some teams need a lot of help from the architects. Some teams need very little, and that's okay. Do what's right. We approach deployment differently. So the point here is that these prescriptive, cookbook, easy, agile, simple approaches aren't going to get the job done. They look good. They make us feel good about ourselves. I'm sure many of us are working with people that just want to be told what to do. I just want to come in, do my job, tell me what to do, and I'll do it. Don't think so, right? We're all in different people in different situations. We need to tailor our approach. We need to tailor our team structures. We need to tailor our styles appropriately. We need to do what's right for the situation that we face. So we need to piece together the right strategies. In the Agile world, we talk about teams need to own their own process. And that's a wonderful philosophy. My team should be allowed to evolve our process, to learn, improve it as we go, run experiments, figure out how we're going to work together effectively. But how can my team own its process when we don't even know what's for sale? And I'm sure many of you, particularly those of you who are new on the Agile path, it's overwhelming how many practices there are, and techniques and strategies, and how the heck do you learn about them all? Right? How do you know the trade-offs? How do you know when to what extent to use each technique? When should you apply them? These are all valid questions that I would hope your coaches can answer. And we also face this issue of our organizations are complex adaptive systems. For a long time now, I've been using this analogy of a racing car, where our IT organization is a racing car. And what's happening is Agile developers have gotten very good at building racing car engines, these development teams. We're good at tweaking this engine. We're good at getting better performance out of the team, making it run faster, getting better productivity, better quality, all that good sort of stuff. And then we take this awesome racing car engine, this Agile development team, and we plunk it into our organizational tractor, the rest of the IT department. And then it's a big surprise, we're not winning the race, because the PMO has a very different vision than we do. And the data folks have a very different vision than the Agile folks and the PMO folks, and so on. So the point of this slide is we need to look at the big picture. How will IT work together? How can we get enterprise architecture and reuse and operations and support, all this DevOps stuff? How can we have different teams following different types of life cycles? How can we get them all working together effectively? How can we get this IT fleet of teams going in pretty much the same direction, as opposed to a bunch of different teams pulling in different directions and going nowhere? And this is the situation in most large enterprises right now. Everybody's got too many different visions. Nobody's really working together. There's no common vision of what we want to do. There might be a little bit of rhetoric around, we're going to be lean, we're going to be agile, blah, blah, blah. I read about it in HBR. And then nothing really happens. They try and they fail, they try and they fail. And, we might get a few good racing car engines, but, we're still hooking up to a tractor. So we've got a few issues here. So anyways, there is a bit of a vision here around how can we get the work to flow, how we can get the value streams going across our IT department. We have another issue around, and this is beginning more and more obvious in the industry the last couple of years, this purist Agile line of thought versus the pragmatic Agilists. We're going to do Scrum. We won't do Scrum, but we're going to be Scrum purists. We're going to do exactly what the Scrum guide says, and no more, no less, and everything will be fine. And it's not just a Scrum issue, of course. So, what is pragmatic Agile? So, in Discipline Agile, we're all about pragmatism. Discipline Agile is truly based on empiricism. We observe, this framework was put together from observations of what we've seen work and not work in organizations around the world in different situations, different levels of scale, all that good sort of stuff. So it encapsulates inputs from hundreds of practitioners, and it's a hybrid, because there's a lot of great ideas out there. This conference is a classic example. There are lots of fantastic ideas being presented today at this conference. If this was a 5-day conference, there would be 5 days of awesome stuff going on here, without a doubt. But it's overwhelming, because there's so much stuff out there. And that's okay. So how does it all fit together? When do you do each one? I was talking about this earlier. When do you do each of these practices? When don't you? What are the trade-offs? How do you choose between them? So one of the things that we do in Discipline Agile is we put it all together, and we help provide a decision framework for how to choose the right practices at the right time to the right extent. Help you own your own process by making it clear what's for sale in the process world here. One of the ways that we do that, and we also got this other issue, that because we can easily observe that different teams work in different ways in different situations, the classic consultant answer of it depends. How do you describe or answer the it depends question? So what we do is we take what we call a goal-based or a capability-based approach to, in this case, to Agile delivery, or lean delivery as well, and we say, well, all these teams, when we start a team, we need to do basic things like put the team together, do some initial requirements, do some initial architecture work, do some initial planning, and so on. But we know that different teams in different situations will address each of those capabilities, each of those process goals in different ways. So of course we would need to drill down a bit. So one of the goals, this is what's called a mind map, if you've never seen one of these before. So on the outside edge of these process goals, this is just for delivery. One of the process goals is how do we deal with changing requirements, changing work during construction while we're building stuff. And there's different ways. So in Scrum, they prescribe a product backlog, and we probably all know what a product backlog is. In Kanban, they talk about having more of a work item instead of a product backlog. They talk more about a product pool or a work item pool, where you pull an item in one at a time. They've got a different way of managing change, and that's okay. Each of those approaches, and there's different ways, those are just two of several, each of those approaches has advantages and disadvantages. Which should you do at a given point in time? You might choose to do one today, and then as your team learns, as you get better and become more effective, you might work your way up the food chain. So for example, when you see an arrow, so the way we read this chart, here's the goal, address changing stakeholder needs. Here, these squares, these squared rectangles, are what we call decision points. So some of our decision points when we're addressing changing stakeholder needs is, when are we going to accept changes? Are we going to do it during an iteration, or are we going to do it during future iterations? How are we going to interact with how are we going to get the information into the team? How do we elicit requirements? How do we prioritize this work? How do we manage our work items? So we've got choices. Now, we're not saying that these are all the possible choices out there, but we are saying this is a pretty darn good range. And we're also saying that some of these choices are better than others. So when you see an arrowhead on this list, what that indicates is the strategies towards the top of the list are generally more effective than the strategies towards the bottom of the list. So for example, when we're managing our work items, when we're managing our stories or the work that we need to do, the least effective method on average is formal change management, the way we often see in traditional teams. A requirements backlog or a product backlog, a little bit better, a lot better actually. A little bit better yet is to have a work item stack, where not only do we have requirements on the backlog, we also have defects and other types of work items like people going on vacation or taking training, all these types of important work. Well, vacation might not be work, but all these other types of work that are important and need to be prioritized and dealt with accordingly. And then finally, better yet, is the work item pool approach, the more of the Kanban lean approach, where we're taking one item in at a time as opposed to a batch of work items or a batch of stories. So that's what we're getting at there. So you've got choices. Make the right choice for the situation that you face based on, and of course take into account the skills that you have as well. Another thing that we see, so anyway, if you drop by the disciplineagiledelivery.com site, you can read about this good stuff in far greater detail. The point is, you've got choices. But if you don't know what's for sale, if you don't know what your process options are, you can't own your own process. So let's surface these choices to our teams. And different teams will make different choices. When you're doing these Agile transformations, you've got to deal, I'm sort of an old school kind of a guy, it's not only just about the people. We're in the Agile community, we're often talking about people and culture and all that sort of stuff, and that's clearly important. But it's not the only game in town. So when you're doing these Agile transformations, you need to deal with all three of these issues in parallel, or you're going to run into trouble. So let's explore this concept a bit. This is from a survey I did a couple years ago now, where we asked people who had been through or were towards the end of an Agile transformation, and we asked a series of questions. One set of questions was, what challenges did you face? So we asked them, how important, how difficult was it to change your business culture, to change your IT culture, to improve, change adopt new tools, or to use existing tools in an Agile manner, or to adopt new types of practices? And then we were able to rank them. So sure enough, the people stuff, these changing the culture was very important. But so was it they found that it was difficult to adopt technical practices like TDD and CI and continuous delivery and stuff like that. And it was actually quite trivial to adopt the Scrum practices. Wow, yeah, it doesn't take a lot of training to hold a 15-minute stand-up meeting every day. Bit of coaching, but it doesn't take that long to learn how to hold a 15-minute stand-up. So anyways, that's okay. We also asked the same set of questions around how important was it to do these things. And once again, the people stuff pretty much came to the top. But in this case, it's interesting. Even though it was easy to adopt the management practices, it was perceived as being reasonably important. And then the adopting the tool stuff at the bottom. Sorry for any tool vendors in the audience, but what can you do? That's okay. Actually, most tool vendors I know are pretty honest about that sort of thing anyways. But those are still all important, just not as important as these other issues. So our experiences, and we're putting, this is more anecdotal evidence or anecdotal observation than anything else. These cultural people issues are roughly 80 to 85% of the effort when you're doing these transformations. But improving your processes is still reasonably important, at 5 to 10%. And there can be great raging battles over this sort of stuff. And improving your tools, also 5 to 10%. Clearly not as important as the people issues, but if you ignore this stuff, you're going to get into trouble. So let's explore that concept. So let's work through each of the sections of this Venn diagram at a time. So if we just focus on people, we're going to get a bunch of happy people. We're having big group hugs every day, but we don't really know what we're doing. But we're happy doing it, right? Everybody's happy, woo-hoo-hoo, great morale, all that sort of stuff. If we focus just on process, we're probably going to have what's called cargo cult agile. We'll have people doing their 15-minute stand-up every day. Every 2 weeks they do a retrospective. Every 2 weeks they do planning. They're following the process blindly. And so they look as if they're doing agile, but they really aren't. And if you just adopt tools, more than likely you're going to get some sort of a standardized approach to agile, which is overly complex and has lots of documents, but doesn't really get the job done. Okay, so you can go out and buy all these ALM tools and all those interesting things, and you'll just be pushing paper. If you focus on people and tools, you're going to get a bunch of agile kids playing with shiny new toys. I see this a lot, unfortunately. If you focus just on process and people, you're going to get a bunch of agile zealots working in small teams, these purists. If you focus just on process and tools, you're going to get cargo cult agile, but at least it's standardized. So management's happy now. At least the bureaucrats within management are happy now. And you got to focus on all three things if you want to be truly disciplined, if you want to have effective agile teams that are learning, improving, and producing real value for your organization. So ignore any one of those three things at your peril. So how do we coach in these established enterprise environments, these banks, insurance companies, government agencies, and so on? So what are we seeing? So in many transformations, I see this basic plan. We're going to have a couple pilot teams. We're going to get going. And you know what? Any idiot can be successful at an agile pilot. That's a no-brainer. Because you stack the deck, right? You get some of your better people. You take on a semi-complex problem, but you've got stakeholders that want to work with you. You got some of your A players. You put them on a team. You get some of your organization or all of your organization out of the way. And wow, they're successful. What a surprise. Good, yeah, that's nice. But then what happens, we keep rolling it out. So now we're rolling out to the B players. And we're rolling it out to the business stakeholders that really don't want to be involved with IT all that much because they've been screwed too many times by the IT folks. And they got better things to do than get screwed yet again because we've got yet another story to tell them. And I'm sure if the stakeholders aren't always that blunt. Sometimes they're more blunt, but they're not always that blunt. But this is basically what happens. Why would I waste my time with you clowns? I'd rather take you out and outsource you as soon as I possibly could. Right? So this is the problem. So anyways, what happens after a while, we get in these harder and harder situations. And so the plan is we're going to do this. But the reality is, we roll it out to a few teams, and we take on these harder situations, and then finally we fail. Because we're still trying to do easy agile We're taking easy Agile techniques, but we're applying it in harder and harder situations until finally it blows up in our face. So what do? You blame Agile, of course. And I'm sure I know for a fact that some of you currently work in organizations where Agile is a dirty word, so you need to come up with a different word for it. And I don't want to make I am going to embarrass a few of you. Maybe use the word rapid. Ooh, there's a few people hanging their heads. I won't tell you what organization that's in. But anyway, at the end, they're doing okay. But still, if Agile is a swear word, look in the mirror and blame yourselves. That's my response to that one. Okay, so let's be a little bit smarter about this. Because it's not about just the development teams, as we know. Because all our development teams, 96% of them at least, are working with other teams. The implication is that as we spin up Agile development teams, we've got to start training and mentoring and coaching these IT teams as well. So as we roll out Agile to more and more development teams, we got to put the support mechanisms in place to actually help them until finally the entire organization or whatever large percentage has moved over to Lean and Agile. This is the way we got to do it. And the challenge is coaching, well, one of many challenges, coaching a development team is a fairly straightforward thing compared to coaching the enterprise architects or the data management folks or the PMO and so on. Whole new ballgame on that one. And yet, we need to do that if we're going to be successful. So, implication here. What types of coaches do we actually need? Obviously, we need team coaches. Clearly, right? Because we got to coach these teams, and most of your coaches will be team coaches because there's a lot of delivery teams out there within your organizations to coach. And your coaches should have some fairly solid experience. For example, if you want to be a certified Discipline Agile coach, you must have at least 5 years experience. And frankly, I don't think that's much to ask for. And it's amazing how much pushback we get on that. What do you mean? I've got like 5 seconds of Agile experience. I can spell Agile. I should be a coach. No, don't think so. So anyways, you need to have some experience to share with your team. Sometimes we need specialized coaches. So for example, coaching a data warehousing team is a very different proposition than coaching a web team. Okay, and if you've never tried that, I would invite you to. Actually, about a year ago after this conference, a bunch of the speakers got together, about a month after the conference last year, and we tried to put together some games in order to describe Agile to data professionals. And this was, there was a bunch of really smart people in this session. There was people with deep game experience, and we see some of them as speakers this year. We had some people with deep Agile. All of us had deep Agile experience. Some of us had deep data experience, and we went round and round and round and couldn't do it. At least not. We were looking for this magical 1 or 2 hour game that we could explain Agile to a data warehousing team. Couldn't do it. It was going to be several days of games, one after the other, in order to pull it off. And even then, it was going to be iffy. So anyways, this is a hard thing. And it takes a lot longer to coach a data warehousing team, probably 3 to 4 times longer than it does to coach just a normal Agile delivery team, because the data folks, and we'll talk about this in a bit, the data folks have a lot of cultural baggage to overcome. And then we need executive coaches for a couple reasons. First, management, the executives need to be coached. The coaches on the teams need help, because when you're coaching a team, you will run into organizational problems that you don't have the authority to change, right? So you've got 2 choices here. Either you give up, which isn't a good solution, or you go for help. And it's the executive coaches are the ones that fly air cover for you, because they have a broader scope, and they can go and talk to the right people to help you. Okay, so this is one of the mechanisms of an Agile or of an executive or an enterprise coach. So you end up building these Agile centers of excellence with different types of coaches in them, and that's okay. And any decent-sized organization had darn well better have different types of coaches if you want to succeed. Otherwise, what's going to happen is there will be some of the groups in the IT department that aren't receiving coaching, and they're going to go off and they're going to do their own thing. They've got their own religion. And the rest of us, we're building a racing car, but the data guys, they still love tractor wheels. So we're going to end up with a racing car with tractor wheels on it. Still not going to win the race. And the Agile folks, they can talk all they want about continuous integration and continuous delivery, but if it takes me 6 weeks to get a new column added to a table in a database, which is 5 freaking minutes worth of work if I have to type it in by hand, maybe a minute or so of work if I've got a tool, but it takes me 6 weeks to do that because of cultural challenges, you're not doing CI and CD anymore, are you? So we we need racing car wheels on the racing car. So how do you transition these enterprise IT teams? So one of the challenges, I sort of hinted at this, these different groups of people have different bodies of knowledge. They follow different religions. And they all have good stories. Like the data folks, they've got the DAMA-BOK, the Data Administration Management, whatever it is, Book of Knowledge. And to them, it's coherent. And it is coherent. But it's a very different vision than what the PMI folks tell me, which is a very different vision than what the Agile people tell me, which is a very different vision than what the operations people tell me with ITIL, which is very different than what the governance people tell me with COVID, and so on and so on and so on. We have these different religions, and they don't fit together. And they're all good stories. So if you're the CIO, who the heck do you listen to? Because you got all these people, they're all playing politics, they've all got great stories to tell, and all these religions, when you look into them, and boring as all heck reading these books of knowledge, but they're all the center of the universe. They all have this consistent message that if only everybody followed their vision, the world would be perfect. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Right? So we got Houston, we got a problem here. And we all have different priorities. The operations people have very different priorities than the enterprise architects and the Agilists, than the PMI, than the PMO, and so on. And they're all good priorities too. They're all coherent, but we're all going in different directions. And as a result, we're not really moving anywhere. This is why it's such a hard thing to do to transition these enterprises. So these teams, these different groups, and I apologize for the thing being cut off on the side here, but that is not under my control. So we all have different attitudes towards Agile. So I go into organizations, and usually the developers and the executives, they're pretty much pro-Agile these days. And it's almost always either the IT executives or the business executives are pushing Agile in the vast majority of organizations these days, often due to fear in the marketplace, which is okay. Fear is an interesting motivator. Intermediate, we often see the PMO. They're, and it's a range, obviously. Different people are different. But for the most part, the project managers and the business analysts, they're sort of, this Agile stuff. Some of them like it, some of them don't, and so on. But then we have groups of people that really don't want to change. They're very skeptical about this Agile stuff. It's obviously, loosey-goosey, just a bunch of children not wanting to write documentation. And they're very, very skeptical, and they're getting very different messages from their communities. The data. I do a lot of work in the data management space, and I'm telling you, they get an exact opposite message from all of their thought leaders, 99% of their thought leaders, about how to work. Completely different. Because they're all smoking the same stuff from the 1970s. They really are. It's very, I love picking on them because, it's so easy. But, and they've got it coming. But it's hard. But the thing is, you got to work with them. We need data management. We need them. We got to work with them. So we got to find ways that make sense to them, and it's slow and it's tedious, but it's got to be done. And if you give up on it, then your organization is not going to make this transformation, because once again, we're in tractor wheel mode. So so different areas of this chart require different strategies. So when we're preaching to the choir, just show them a few new ways. Here's a new technique. TDD, boo, and they run with it and they go. It's pretty easy. It really is. That's what Easy Agile is all about. When we're dealing with the intermediate people, we need to show we understand their issues. We need to have intelligent conversations with the project managers and with the with the business analyst and say, hey, yeah, we understand what you're trying to achieve, and by the way, there's different ways we can do this. Let me show you that. Yeah, let's start talking about agile analysis as opposed to traditional analysis. And then finally, for the hardcore folks, the true anti-agilists, not only do we need to show that we understand their issues, we also need to be able to show we can do their job more effectively. Stand back and watch me do this data stuff. Oh, it takes you 6 weeks to do that? Watch me do it in a minute. And not break anything, which you were afraid of, which is why it took you 6 weeks. Let me show you how to do that. Okay. There's a wonderful book called Database Refactoring, if you don't believe me. Check it out. So anyways, we're going to coach in different ways. We're going to interact with different groups of people in different ways that reflects their culture, that reflects their priorities and their mindset. And that's okay. So we need to go in with a lot of coaching techniques in our mix. So just to sort of wrap things up here, and I'll have a minute or two for questions, I guess. When you're working in an enterprise, so what does enterprise agile look like? You need to scale agile in two ways. First of all, tactically. And what we mean by tactical agility at scale is how do you take a development team and help them address the range of situations that they find themselves in. So the out-of-the-box agile stuff like Scrum and XP, wonderful, wonderful stuff, provides an awesome foundation from which to start. But you need to put it all together. So how do you do agile from beginning to end? How does it all fit? How does architecture fit in, analysis fit in, and testing fit in, management and requirements, all that sort of stuff? How does it all fit in from beginning to end, and how do we streamline it and not fall into the trap of water scrumfall? Okay, that's what Disciplined Agile Delivery was all about. So we provide a foundation from which development teams can actually work in fairly straightforward situations and do it successfully from beginning to end, where we answer all these questions of how do I modify what we're doing. So then once you've learned how to walk, so once you can do Agile from beginning to end successfully in reasonably straightforward situations, then you can take on the harder situations. If you don't know how to do small team Agile, you have no hope doing large team. If you don't know how to do Agile when you're in the same room, you're going to really struggle when you're globally distributed. If you don't know how to do Agile when there's no regulations at all to worry about, you're going to struggle when you're in life-critical regulatory situations. Okay, so we need to be a little bit smarter about this. So, and I think a lot of organizations run into trouble, particularly when they're trying, these larger, the banks, insurance companies, government agencies, when they try to get into Agile, and they experiment with Scrum a bit, and then they figure out, oh yeah, we're great, we've had a couple Scrum successes, boom, let's do SAFe now, right? So we were sort of able to pull off 3 or 4 Agile teams of 7 or 8 people. Of course we can handle a 200-person program. Why couldn't we? We're a bank. We're just that smart. So, anyways, it's not true. You got to learn how to walk before you try to run on this. Otherwise, interesting things will happen to you. And then we have strategic scaling. So this is trying to answer the question. So yeah, sure, we can scale Agile within a single team, but how do we get Agile working across our entire IT department, across our entire organization? When we get out of just the delivery space, and we have to start worrying about, now we've got these great engines, but how does this rest of this car, what does the rest of this car look like? How does it fit together? And how do we evolve it in the middle of a race? Because we're a complex adaptive system. So what this diagram is getting at is the workflow, the lean workflow of a lean IT department. And then finally, so how do we adopt Agile across an organization? Agile usually starts off with a grassroots adoption. I'm sure many of you have seen this before. Then management gets concerned, they decide to go for help, and the successful organizations are the ones that invest in coaching and training, not only for the development teams, but also for management, also for these enterprise teams, and they realize that they're on a journey. It's not a destination. So this is a multi-year endeavor, not a 6-month project, and then we'll move on to the next thing. If you think that it's a 6-month project, you'd might as well just get a big stack of money now and flush it down the toilet and get it over with, because at least you can say you had a little bit of fun flushing money down a toilet because you actually got to do that. Because it's going to be the exact same thing. So you might as well just get it over with. And it's actually better to flush the money explicitly down the toilet, because then at least Agile doesn't have a bad name. All right, so in your organization. And I would invite you to talk to some of the other people here about that, because I know for a fact some of you work in organizations where you're not allowed to say the word Agile anymore. And then over several years, you can start bringing Agile out. And this is a challenge, because these transformations, they're at the mercy of reorganizations. They're at the, new CIO comes in, first thing she does, she's got to kill a few of the programs from the previous CIO, because that's what you do, right? You got to put your mark on this group within the first 3 months. And if you're only part way through the transformation, and particularly if you're part way through the transformation, you don't have metrics showing how awesome you are, then you're one of the, your program, your transformation program, is going to be one of the ones that's being looked at hard to kill, because you'll be seen as something that's easy to take out and shoot, particularly if you're still in that political fighting aspect of the transformation, because there'll be enough people that you've ticked off by now that they're coming to get these evil Agile people, because they know that if we don't get the Agile guys, maybe they'll get me. There'll be that sort of politicking going on. So anyways, got to be pretty careful about that. So groom, one of the things you got to do, whoever your sponsor is, whoever's the champion of your program, make sure they're grooming somebody to take over. Otherwise, you're at risk. Succession planning is absolutely critical, because this is a multi-year endeavor. You better make sure it's being supported by a large number of the management team. And then finally, after many, many years, maybe you can say you've adopted it. The really smart organizations realize what they do become. They don't become an Agile organization, they become a learning organization, where they're constantly trying to get better. Okay? So it's a journey, it's not a destination that you'll ever get to, but it's nice to sort of pretend that we're eventually going to declare success. But hopefully we never will. Some blatant advertising, we got a couple courses coming up, one in Toronto, one in Montreal, so drop by our booth if you're interested in that at all. And then finally, a few URLs there. Do I have any time? I can take one or two questions, I guess. I will need to repeat, though, so keep your questions concise. Any questions? That gentleman there.
Yeah, you just mentioned something that in the last few years I was in the conference, and I want to know more. Agile methods, exactly. Because it's talking about the fact that you capture along the way, let's say in a year of different teams. So which one, let's say you practice or you recommend, which type of Agile kind of method?
Well, yes, the question is which types of Agile methods do I recommend? Well, I recommend Discipline Agile, of course. So Discipline Agile is a framework that supports multiple types of life cycles. So our approach is, because different teams work differently, we support different ways, different methods. So we support a Scrum-based life cycle, a Kanban-based one, a continuous delivery, like a modern Agile one, I guess you got to call it now, an exploratory one based on Lean Startup. So, because you should have choices, because it's phenomenally easy to observe in any decent-sized organization. You'll have some Scrumish type teams, you'll have some Kanbanish type teams, you'll have some continuous delivery teams, and they'll be working on the same floor with each other. And that's okay, right? So your framework as an organization had darn well better take into account that you're really a multimodal organization. So yeah, one method does not fit all. So I think there's a talk on which method is right for you this afternoon. I hope the answer is it depends, but, well, I know the answer is it depends, but I hope that's the answer in that talk. But that gentleman there, and that'll be the last one. Oh, metrics. Oh, sorry. Well, the answer is it depends. Sorry, I didn't hear that. I have bad hearing. Yeah. So when it comes to metrics, I'm a firm believer in a lightweight goal question metric type of an approach. So you need to, what's important to you? So if time to market is really important to you, then you will measure time to market. If quality is very important to you, you will measure quality. If value delivery is important, you'll have metrics that measure value delivery. So it depends, so what's important to you, that's what it depends, then so you ask what goal are you trying to achieve? So improve quality, improve time to market. Okay, well, what questions do we need to ask to know that we've improved time to market? What metrics do we need to collect to answer those questions to determine if we've improved time to market? That's basically GQM in a nutshell. Keep that as lightweight as you possibly can. A lot of organizations have shot themselves in the foot with GQM because they made it heavyweight. GQM does not say anywhere to be heavyweight, but it gets interpreted that way. So anyways, thank you very much. I'm happy to stick around. I'm also happy to hang out I will be hanging out at my booth. So if you want to hunt me down, feel free. Thank you very much.